Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Manlove, and I'm a University of Minnesota Master Gardener intern, and I've got the shirt here to prove it. And I welcome to my presentation on gardening lake friendly. First, a little bit about me. I live in Rochester, Minnesota, and I retired last year after a career as an IBM engineer. But before that, I grew up on the south end of the lake. That if you spend any time in the area, you are probably familiar with that farm. And for the last 30 years, my wife and I have had a place on the east side of the lake, sort of on the south end. And before we get too far into this, I should mention that at the end of this presentation, there is going to be the links and some various sources for additional reading. And so if there's something in the presentation piques your interest, and you want to learn more about it, you should be able to find that information. And also, as a master gardener, I'm a volunteer and available for consultation. So if you would like to email me with questions or set up some time for me to come over and do a site walkthrough, I am available. So let's talk a little bit about our favorite lake. It was created in 1886 when Joe Delaney dammed the river to power a flour mill, which means it's one of the few lakes in the state that actually has a birthday that we know of. And we know that it's long and about how wide it is, and it's about a 2,000-acre lake, which is semi-significant. When people talk about lakes, it's like, well, what size is it? And if it's 2,000 acres, it's usually considered to be a fairly large lake. And one last bit of trivia, it is classified as oligotrophic. And that is a good thing. Oligotrophic lakes are characterized by low nutrient values, which limits the lake's ability to support animal life. Consequently, the water remains clear. Now, because excess phosphorus loading is a threat to many Minnesota lakes, the DNR did a study where they analyzed data from close to 3,000 lakes with a goal of identifying lakes that were most likely to see substantial declines in water clarity with an increasing nutrient load. And for each lake in the study, a phosphorus load target and load goal were computed, along with an estimate for each lake's phosphorus sensitivity, and the lakes were then ranked. Now, the ranking system generally produced high values for large oligotrophic lakes that were vulnerable to phosphorus loading and near their estimated loading threshold, and most importantly, would benefit from a well-designed phosphorus reduction project in their watershed. Now, Long Lake was one of 200 lakes included in the most sensitive category, and the target value for phosphorus reduction for Long Lake was 43 pounds. Now, is that a lot? It doesn't sound like a lot. However, 1 pound of phosphorus can feed 500 pounds of algae, and 43 times 500 is 21,500 pounds of algae, and that sounds like a lot. That's over 10 tons. And that 43-pound goal is based on a 5% reduction in the total nutrient load going into the lake. So while 43 pounds is the goal, there is a lot more we could do if we really wanted to clean up the lake. So the key takeaways from all of this are: the lake was identified by the DNR as one that would most likely see substantial declines in water clarity with increasing nutrient pollution load. It is a lake that would benefit from a well-designed phosphorus reduction project. And finally, the phosphorus reduction goal for Long Lake is 43 pounds. So what is this nutrient load and where is it coming from? Now, this is a chart that you saw in Steve Henry's presentation, and let's start with that red slice of pie. 35% of the nutrient load is what is considered to be ambient sources, and Steve had a really good way of describing this. If you leave your car parked outside at the lake for 2 weeks, when you come back, is it going to be clean or is it going to be dirty? And what you see covering your car is also what's falling into the lake. And as you might suspect, we have a very limited capacity to impact this 35% slice of the pie. Now, the green slice, upstream and groundwater. This compromises 5% of the load. And as residents of Long Lake, we are extremely fortunate. If we want to have an impact on the quality of our lake, we don't have to work with hundreds or potentially thousands of lakeshore owners on a dozen different lakes upstream. Think about First Crow Wing Lake and how many lakes in that watershed flow into the Crow Wing River and ultimately into First Crow Wing Lake. So on this particular point, we are very lucky, and it's also why it's such a small slice of the pie. And finally, this blue slice of the pie. 60% of the nutrient load is the amorphously named section around the lake. What does that mean? It means that the people and practices and activities of people living immediately around the lake are contributing 60% of the nutrient pollution into the lake. And that is both good and bad news. On the one hand, we are polluting our own lake that is near and dear to our hearts. And on the other hand, we can really only impact 65% of this chart, and 92% of that is in our control. We're not First Crow Wing. As a singular group, we can take measures to address this. So what contributes to this giant piece of the pie? Well, let's talk some about that. What is composing that 60%? Runoff or stormwater runoff. When rain or snow melt flows over the ground, it picks up nutrients, and it is the #1 source of nutrient pollution in most developed lakes. Malfunctioning septic systems. Pretty self-explanatory and just a little bit gross. Among other things, septic systems need to be maintained. They need to be pumped out every 3 to 4 years. Misuse of fertilizer. Using too much fertilizer, spraying fertilizer directly into the lake or onto hard surfaces that can wash directly into the lake. Using the wrong fertilizer. Those 3 numbers you see on the bags of fertilizer, the NPK numbers, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The middle number is supposed to be 0. And since the early 2000s, that has been the state law. However, there are applications where fertilizer with phosphorus is allowed, so you can find and buy it. It's just against the law to use it on established lawns. Fire pits. Best practices for fire pits are for them to be greater than 50 feet. That's 50 from the lake. And if not, you really should be digging the ashes out after you've had a fire and haul them away. Ideally to a compost pile that is greater than 50 feet from the lake. Mowing practices. Don't have the discharge of the mower blow directly onto the lake or onto hard surfaces that can flow into the lake. Pet waste. Just like the human waste in the malfunctioning septic systems, pet waste is high in phosphorus, so clean up after your dogs. Now, we could probably do a standalone presentation on any one of these topics, but we're not going to do that. However, if something interests you and you want to learn more, go Google it. There is tons and tons of information out there on all this stuff. However, collectively, making conscientious and proactive decisions on these topics is the very definition of living lake friendly. And since runoff is the largest contributor to phosphorus pollution in our lake, how we think about and manage our lots is the best tool we have for dealing with this problem. It is the answer to the would benefit from a well-designed phosphorus reduction project that the DNR described in a previous chart. Hence, I have coined my own initiative, which is Gardening Lake Friendly. Well, what is Gardening Lake Friendly? At a high level, it is eliminating or minimizing stormwater runoff by managing our own personal watersheds, i.e. our own lots. Now, what is a watershed? A watershed is an area of land in which all the precipitation falling within it flows to a certain point, usually a receiving water body such as a river, lake, stream, or wetland, and in our case, that water body is Long Lake. Now, I hate to belabor this point, and I'm not picking on First Crow Wing. It's just that it's such a good example. But Long Lake is a 2,000-acre lake, and the Long Lake watershed is a 15,000-acre watershed. So it's about 7.5 times the size of the lake. First Crow Wing is a 500-acre lake with a 166,000 acre watershed, which means the watershed is 318 times the size of the lake. So not all watersheds are equal. And if you had to choose one to implement a well-designed phosphorus reduction project on, you choose Long. And so ultimately, the concept or goal is to keep all the water that falls on your lot on your lot. Excuse me. So how do we manage our watersheds? So if gardening lake friendly equals managing our watersheds, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is get to know your watershed. Is there an obvious slope? Is there a driveway, sidewalk, or downspout that slopes to the lake and water rushes down it and directly into the lake? And this may seem a little extreme, but what I like to do, and the simplest thing, is to go outside and walk around when it is raining. Have a look. Where is water flowing? Where does it collect? These pseudo-riparian areas like this are microclimates. And microclimate areas are prime locations for natural area gardens because they will slow or even prevent runoffs. Microclimates are special because they allow unique plants to thrive, and the opportunity to grow unique plants are absolute catnip for a gardener. The expression is right plant in the right place, and in these microclimates, you can have a plant thrive that in a location just 10 feet away, it just sort of survives. So now, what do these natural areas look like? Well, it can be whatever you want. It can be as simple as mowing an area, let it go natural. It can be a formally designed rain garden with an excavated depression and carefully selected plants. The particular situation and your ambition will suggest the final garden design. Now, if you are asking, what kind of plants should I use? Well, use whatever you want. However, I'm going to try and make the case for natives. Why natives? Well, they're tough. They're drought resistant, kind of the definition of tough. They're low maintenance. They've evolved over thousands of years to thrive in this ecosystem. And as an added bonus, they serve as host plants for native pollinators. And let me just point out here, don't let great be the enemy of good. You don't have to be a purist. If you have some favorite non-native plants, put them in. It's not like your garden would somehow be contaminated, right? Do natives, do non-natives, do a mix. There really are no rules here. What matters is creating areas where water will infiltrate rather than flow into the lake. But if you are interested in natives and are asking, where do I find out what plants are native to my area? Well, one thing you could do is just go drive around and see what's growing in the ditches. Another would be to go out and use a plant finder. And through the miracle of the internet, you can find websites like the one at the National Wildlife Federation, nwf.com. And on this website, you can search on any zip code, like 56470, Park Rapids zip code, and it will bring back the list of plants that are native to this area. And for those plants, they will tell you what pollinators the plants serve as hosts for. And you can reverse that search. You can search by pollinator, and it will tell you what plants serve as the host. Think monarchs. So this is a really handy website. And since I'm a gardener, here are some of my Zone 3 hardy native plants. Starting with purple coneflowers, love them. They grow in almost any condition. They'll have long-lasting blooms. If you are going to plant them, you have to be prepared to administer a little tough love because they will take over if you let them. Goldenrod. There are some 45 species of goldenrod in various shapes and sizes native to Minnesota. And I know what you're thinking, allergies. Well, goldenrod pollen is heavy and does not go airborne. So when your allergies act up, it's not goldenrod. Little blue stem, just a lovely ornamental grass. In a natural garden, a good rule of thumb is that 50% or more of the plants should be ornamental grass. Grasses are the neutrals of the landscape, right? They give your eye a place to rest. Brown-eyed Susans. right? What's not to like? Turtle heads. Incredible, and they're called turtle heads because the shape of the blossom or flower looks like a turtle head. It's an incredibly adaptable plant. It can thrive in almost any condition from full sun to full shade. Joe Pyeweed, spectacular plant. It can grow to be 7 feet tall, and it's a host for swallowtail butterflies. And when it is in bloom, it will just be covered with bees. Now, obviously, with a 7-foot tall plant that comes up from the ground every year, you don't want to put this in a location that would obstruct a view that you are particularly fond of. Milkweed. There are several species of milkweed native to the state, and all of them are hosts for monarch butterflies. And this happens to be the whorled milkweed. And as you can see, it has a much different leaf structure than the common milkweed that you'll see grown in the ditches. Finally, prairie dropseed. This is another grass. It's a low clump forming grass with a really, really fine texture. It doesn't get the same press as big and little blue stem, but it is native grass, and it's just beautiful. Now, gardening is very personal, but I believe I could pull together a very pleasing garden using nothing but these 8 plants. And you might be asking yourself, do you really have to go to all this work to have a natural garden? And as I previously mentioned, the answer is no. There is an easier way. You can create a great natural garden by simply defining an area and stop mowing it and waiting to see what comes up. And it takes 2 to 3 years for this to happen, for the existing turf graft to kind of go up and get pushed out. But if you do it, I promise you will be delighted and amazed at what comes up. I stopped mowing my lot, mowing the majority of my lot about 12 years ago. And not only do I have an abundance of trees that have seeded themselves, I've got wild blueberries that have come up and they're becoming a nice little crop. I've got asters, goldenrod, Indian tobacco, lead plant, northern breadstraw, wild lily of the valley, false Solomon seal, anise hyssop, and lots more. Now, is it cheating to add plants to speed up the process? Well, absolutely not. Manage your new gardens any way you see fit. Put in what you want and take out what you don't. And so if you are ready to start including natural areas in your yard, what about the existing turf grass? It means it's time to talk about the lawn, but we're not going to talk very long about it because this is a lengthy and complicated topic in and of itself, and maybe we have a topic for next year's meeting. But green lawns are not very green. In an environmental sense, they're not biologically diverse. They offer nothing to pollinators. They require fertilizers and herbicides, which can and do flow into the lake, and they require a lot of work and money. So some things to think about instead of the traditional turf lawn: consider a bee lawn, also known as a flowering lawn. This incorporates clover and even creeping Charlie, the very things we spend a good portion of our suburban lives battling. We now want to promote those things. Something else: do you really need to mow property line to property line? Think of turf grass as an area rug rather than wall-to-wall carpeting. And in that vein, you would mow where you walk, play, and lounge, right? Look at your yard. Are there areas that are difficult to mow, or areas where it is difficult to get grass to grow? These are great places to start. And you can ease into this, right? Round off a corner, leave a couple of feet around trees, create an island around a group of trees, move off the lot liner foot or two, baby steps. I've got some techniques that I use when starting a new natural area that I don't have time to go into, but if you're interested, get in touch. Now, if we combine lawns and natural areas, I know we've been conditioned to think about lawns as the suburban ideal, but we're not in the suburbs. We are in a sensitive ecosystem on a lake that is under stress from human activity. And I might ask, do you really come to your vacation home to do yard work? I mean, having natural areas is less work, less expensive, can increase privacy, and is better for the environment. And how many things can you say that about? Mowing less of your watershed creates natural areas. And natural areas, as I've said before, hold back water, allowing time for it to infiltrate. Okay, so if we combine the elements of watershed management, natural areas, and nutrient reduction, we get buffer strips. Whoops. And I was going to say, and if you do incorporate natural areas into your yard, you will always have something to watch as the pollinators and birds move in. And so now, moving on to buffer strips. A shoreline buffer is an unmowed strip of native vegetation that extending from the water's edge. And you're probably asking yourself, well, how wide should it be? And the very unsurprising answer is the wider, the better. It is estimated that a 20-foot wide buffer strip can trap 80% of the phosphorus runoff and 90% of the sediment pollution. It is recommended that a natural vegetation be maintained along 75% of the shoreline. And significantly, buffer strips are the most important action we can take. And as we wrap up, if you're asking yourself, is all this really necessary? I get it. It's different. Lawns are what we grew up with. Perspectives on that are changing though. In particular, they are changing for lakeshore yards where the very existence of turf grass can have an adverse effect on something that we all share and cherish. Clean water affects us all. It's better for fishing, it's better for playing, and it's certainly better for property values. Steve told me about a situation on his lake near Alexandria. Increased nutrient load from development and changing in zoning practices caused the clarity of the water in his lake to degrade severely over the years. His sister had not been back for a while and was visiting, saw the lake and said, "What's up with the lake?" And Steve's answer was, "Well, that's the way it is now." And I can't think of a sadder conversation to have with my sister relative to Long Lake than that. So we're all in this together. We all share the lake. We all want a clean lake. We all want to turn a clean lake over to our grandkids and kids. And it can be as simple as changing our perspective on what an attractive lake lot looks like and taking measures to start gardening lake friendly, and thinking even bigger than that, start living lake friendly. Thanks for your time and happy gardening.